Welcome, everybody. Between enlargement and internal reform, how can a larger union work? That's the topic of today. And since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we saw a lot of unintended or at least unpredictable consequences of this war. We saw Switzerland joining EU in implementing economic sanctions. We saw Sweden and Finland applying for membership in NATO. We saw Germany getting rid of Russian fossil fuels. And perhaps also as surprising, we see a new talk in the EU about enlargement, which was considered quite a toxic topic for many, many years. As the EU wants to continue to grow, apparently, it must also address a lot of issues. The distribution of power in a larger union, the way decisions are made, the distribution of money in the future, and of course, the balance between national decisions and decisions taken at EU level. What are potential benefits of an enlargement and what are drawbacks? And have the 27 the strength to reform themselves in order to be operable? That's the question, or some of the questions of our panel. I can promise you a lively debate because I already had one with our panelists. Please welcome our guests. First of all, it's Dalia Grybauskaité, the former president of Lithuania. She was also awarded the International Charlemagne Prize in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Next is Werner, the president of the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg. So I think we're going to speak a lot about money. Thank you for being here. On the other side is Ivan Krastev. He is a political scientist, I think a very well-known one from Bulgaria, and author of... Please.
Wrong opinion.
Author of books that I found very, very interesting, where I already got the agreement that I can sum two books up in one sentence, where more or less he makes the case that you cannot force political ideas on people without getting huge divisions in the societies. It's okay?
In political science, everything is okay these days.
And now, my biggest challenge today, please welcome Tkeshelashvili. She was former Foreign Affairs Minister of Georgia, Justice Minister. She worked for the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative in Kyiv and is now working for USAID, also in Kyiv. Welcome, and after the applause, please pronounce your name once again.
Tkeshelashvili.
Thank you.
It's even more
Welcome to all of you. And I would like to, before later on we open it up to your questions, and especially Dalia Grybauskaité was very keen on getting your questions. I would like you to have your introductory remarks. Mrs. Grybauskaité, can a larger union work?
The question is irrelevant because a union will enlarge. It is a necessity because of our economic competitiveness is lacking and because of needs to defend and secure ourselves. That means enlargement is happening and will be happening, and we will be requested to manage it, no matter what. So that means we will manage. We will discuss in our Brussels bubble all details as it was even before enlargement of 10 countries in 2004. But it is a necessity, it will happen, and we will manage.
And President Zelensky visited Brussels on the 9th of February. He was at the press conference with the President of the European Council, with Charles Michel. He said, we want negotiations this year, and I quote Volodymyr Zelensky saying, when I say this year, Charles, I mean this year, so 2023. What do you think if you hear this?
I think that they're right, making the best what they can during this very difficult time for them, and pushing us Europeans, who are too relaxed, reacting too late, and still thinking that we have time. We do not have time, and they do not have time. And I think that it is realistic to start negotiations. That not mean that negotiations will be finished very soon, but to start, it is realistic, because any process of negotiations, and with Bulgaria, for example, we remember it is the golden time for any accession country, because you're under pressure of reforms. Of course, for Ukraine is even more specific situation because they're under pressure of war. But it is great possibility to change from scratch everything and to rebuild and build from new the new country. And Ukrainians are doing it very fast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoyer. Enlargement will also be about money and the distribution of money within the EU. What is your take on the challenges we are facing?
My take is that we better get out of the nitty-gritty and see the big picture. When I was nominated European Affairs State Minister for the first time in 1994 in Bonn, I was asked what I believe the European Union integration process is. And I said, that's the organization of the survival of the European countries in the globalization process. Well, maybe nowadays the word globalization is not so much en vogue anymore, but still the process is there, which leads to the fact that from 37% of GDP globally in 1994 to today to 13% of GDP globally produced by the Europeans, this is a huge decline. And if we don't take care of our interests in the globalization process, or however you call it, together, we will fail. And there, I would dare to say, and I know we have a couple of very critical candidates for membership in the European Union, but the membership of Ukraine will strengthen the European Union and not weaken it.
Please go ahead.
Well, maybe I've surprised people now, because when I read the papers and the concerns and the debates in some parliaments, I have the feeling people are expecting a poor developing country entering the European Union. Jesus Christ, this country is in certain aspects far ahead of us. When I talk to Ukrainian refugees in my city of Cologne or in Luxembourg, these ladies, they always tell me, well, when I need some administrative stuff done in my country, I do it digitally. Here I need to apply for an appointment at the city office somewhere, and then I wait a couple of weeks until I get a possibility to deliver my request. So this is a country that is in certain ways ahead of us. And look into the past. Where in the Soviet Union was the most advanced technology produced and developed? In Ukraine. Why don't we see that once Ukraine is member of the European Union, the European Union will then be one of the biggest exporters of grain and other agricultural products. So let's have a little bit more a positive approach and not this negative assumption that in a zero-sum game we are going to be the losers.
Thank you very much. I stick to Eka. You used to work with the European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative. Mr. Hoyer just said Ukraine is in many ways more advanced than other countries. Can you confirm that?
Well, if we look into Ukraine and then capacity, versatility, agility of the country during the war, not only to sustain war with Russia in the way that Ukraine does, but at the same time to engage itself in the wide spectrum of reforms that they are very actively engaged in, becoming a leader, not to be offensive to our colleagues and friends from Estonia, almost the leader in some areas in digitalization during the wartime, and becoming and having that part of the development enticing the spirit of future in terms of economic sector as well in that regard in the country. If you think of it and then put yourself in the shoes of those people in the conditions where they are much more advanced in one very pivotal aspect, I would say. They are ready to fight for the values and principles they believe in, and they are ready to fight for their future and build for that already now in parallel to waging the war. I don't think that many nations can be proud to say the same about themselves these days. Globally speaking, I'm not speaking about Europe particularly now. So if we speak about that moment of reimagining the future at a time when there are forces, and very serious forces globally, that unravel the current order with the aim of creating the new one, fitting their perspective of what the future should be. Without that spirit of creativity, thinking outside of the box, and ability to sustain hardship now for the future to be better for tomorrow, I don't think that Europe has a competitive chance to be as much of a bigger player that Europe has been for the time being. In other words, it's not the enlargement per se that we're talking about, but how enlargement serves the bigger purpose for Europe to emerge in this time of crisis as a player that could be proud of being not only competitive vis-a-vis other players, but be a driving force of what that future should be globally as well. And in that regard, if Europe is not putting its own act together, it's not to the detriment of the continent only, but then to the transatlantic axis that has been bringing hope for so many in the global south as well, that they had chance of upscaling their future, not being at the mercy of being part of these fields of influences of the countries like China, for that matter, or Russia, even extraterritorially as far as Africa is. So when we speak about the global south and their future in so many ways depends on how the perspective of a rules-based order, competitive and prosperous, can emerge. And if EU is not transforming itself with that next level and wave of enlargement, which I'm sure will be very successful and then will give a chance for Europe to reimagine and reinvent itself, Europe will continuously be stuck more with conflict in itself and crisis, rather than become an actor that we would all hope for Europe to be continuously.
Even if you're a political thinker in a way, if you hear what Eka just said, Europe has to reinvent itself, rethink itself. What should this Europe look like in the future? And could you also make the comparison for us to understand it better? What it is today. So what is the transformation the EU faces?
Thank you very much. I really believe that major historical changes is not when we start to give new answers to the old questions, but when the question has changed. And from this point of view, we talk about enlargement, but it's a totally different talk than we had, for example, even with the Bulgarian enlargement. Then the question was how European Union can transform its neighbors. Now, basically, the question of enlargement is how not to allow others outside of Europe to transform us. And this is simply a different question. And I do believe that there are three things that are going, in my view, to change dramatically. When the enlargement started, and listen, I'm Bulgarian, close to the Balkans. You know, Western Balkans are in negotiations now for 20 years. And do you know what is the best joke about the enlargement in the Balkans? What is the difference between the optimists and the pessimists? The optimist is the one who believes that Albania is going to join during the Turkish presidency. And the pessimist that basically Turkey is going to join during the Albanian presidency. So I'm saying this because before the idea was you have here the European Union, and the European Union is surrounded by the waiting rooms, in which basically nations can stay, and as much as it takes, they can be there. Now the waiting rooms are totally transformed into emergency rooms. You don't have an option. By the way, the question, is Ukraine to be in or out? Ukraine is already in. Ukraine is already in financial terms. It's very much in defense terms. But the biggest problem for the European Union is that the war really challenged three major assumptions on which European Union has built its idea of security. One is that economic interdependence means security. And listen, it can mean security. As we can understand, it can also mean vulnerability. The second is that military power doesn't matter. And suddenly it doesn't matter when you don't have it. And thirdly, honestly speaking, one of the things that people are less talking about, Ukraine also challenged part of the European versions of the transformative power of nationalism. Because what you see in Ukraine is a very powerful civic nationalist mobilization. So all this is going to change the European Union. It's not, I don't believe, honestly speaking, that in 5 years you're going to have an Albanian commissioner and that Albania is going to have a veto power in the European Union. But I'm telling you, not only Ukraine, but even the Western Balkans are going to be integrated as part of European Union in one way or the other, because simply they're not going to be an empty spaces anymore.
But I open it up to all of you. If that's not what we're going to see, what are we going to see then? How will Albania be part of the EU, or how will Ukraine, if you say they are already more or less in, how will they be part of the decision making? What is your take on that?
I can jumpstart maybe with how we imagine that being outside of the EU right now, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and then Ukraine is an engine, obviously, in this process. First, for that process to work, there needs to be credibility into it, so that we put the new life into that symbiotic link of seriousness of the offer from the EU side, and then the reforms that we have to do as the homeworks, obviously. And by saying reinventing what Europe should be, we need to reinvent the process itself. Yes, we've done enlargements, EU has done enlargement in different ways, in different waves, right? But then process needs to be reimagined as well. While I do believe that the membership per se, as a full membership, definitely needs to be part of the process. It's not that at the expense of de facto ILAM membership, we should forgo that not only hope, but then credible offer that that's what it means that you're part of when you are in. But in what are the stages through which you get there, so that you already have preliminary tangible results on both sides that are checked by benchmarks and actual benefits that you gain in sectoral alignment already, access to the markets in different sectors like energy or anything else, so that until the time when you become the full member with the political rights assigned to you that you can benefit from, you already feel in a tangible way, and Europe feels this as well, that you are in because you are starting to contribute as well to the common space. And Ukraine, by far, obviously, compared to any other candidate states, will be a contributing member much sooner than anybody would think of, maybe. One element that I really want to emphasize here is that, because I hear it here and there that, but then, you know, membership of Ukraine, if there are accession talks opened and then the integration process starts, I mean, what it will take for Europe to ensure rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine that has suffered so much during the wartime. And my argument there is that it will be a common task for so many, and it's not only EU, but EU will have to be one of the leads. And the process of membership and accession talks and results based on that shall not be equated with the reconstruction process. They are two mutually reinforcing processes, but the cost of reconstruction shall not be seen as a cost that we need to bear through the membership process of Ukraine, because then it's insurmountable fear that many will have that it will be one of the most costliest enlargement process. No, reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine will be costly, but on its own merits. And by the way, one of the ways to ensure that it's less costly for taxpayers, either in the US or in the EU, is that all of the frozen Russian money of the culprit country that waged the war of aggression needs to be actually put to that cost, and then submitted to all of the common funds that will be created for donors that be for Ukraine, for rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine. So Russia itself, first of all, definitely needs to pay for what Russia did as a matter of accountability and prevention for the future aggressions or the wars in the future by other countries as well. But we need to picture that as well when we speak about the cost, so that it doesn't seem to be insurmountable as it should maybe otherwise would for many.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Grybauskaité, 2 weeks from now, we are going to, I personally going to travel to Moldova to witness the second Council of the European Political Community. Do you see a benefit from that new format in order to get all this, what we now heard, the support for Ukraine, but not the full integration, no Albanian and Ukrainian commissioners? Is this like a step between the situation we have now and full membership?
Usually I say that any formats are good if they are seeking results, if they are seeking only the process to be involved or to be engaged. I don't like. because...
what about the EPC?
We will see. They will be seeking the results, or they will be indulging only in the process. So in reality, it's only political will. Country will be included, or negotiations will start it or not. And neither any commissions or entities created will help. For example, then we have been taken into European Union 10 new countries. It was mainly political will. The largest countries, especially Germans, decisive acts. And of course, we were not very economically developed. And of course, it was a lot of costs if you calculate only from the point of view of European budget. But European budget is only 1% of all our economic wealth. 1%. What are we calculating? What are we talking about? Really, it's nothing. And today, after 19 years, Lithuania, practically, we already 90% of European economic average. 90%, and after future enlargement, we will be paymasters, not beneficiaries anymore. So 20 years is for country to from very low level of ex-Soviet economy to become practically prosperous European country. This the chance which we need to give to ourselves, the first, I mean to European Union. Ukraine will be not only economically important to strengthen European Union, but also militarily. Today there is no any European army stronger than Ukraine. There is no any European country's army with such experience. And there is no European nation today having such motivation to fight, motivation to exist, motivation to create its future. So such country will be a vital new blood for European Union. Why it is important for us, as soon as possible, to allow such countries to be our members. And decision-making. And then we're starting in our European bubble to discuss QMV questions, how to vote, how to make decisions. I was 10 years around the table in the Council, 5 years in Commission, working with you as Budget Commissioner. And believe me, everything matters only political will. We don't need to change any European treaties. Already in Lisbon Treaty was created for enlargement. There is provisions of some exceptions for foreign policy as sanctions. We don't need unanimity, but we always use unanimity. The same is so-called special abstention. Countries can abstain,
constructive.
But it's creative rhetoric. And politically, never used again. So we can create any creative accounting, as I call, in rhetoric, in your treaties. But if you are not willing politically to use them, you're not using them. So today we already have all formally treaty instruments to go ahead and to make decisions. But we're not doing this.
But are you making the case now that you can have 8 more countries or even more in the Union with the same treaty?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
And the most important that no matter that in the Lisbon Treaty there is a proposal to reduce commissioners, we can have even plus more commissioners, but we can, as already today is, we can make them different functions, the senior, junior, whatever you can creatively create. It's no matter. Formality, it's formality. Political will and decisiveness. And if we will understand that it is vital for our interests, from economic point of view, from a security point of view, to have these countries inside, if not we know who will take them back. We know we have neighborhood who is waiting for Europe to hesitate. We know who, and we can name it. Russia, other countries who are aggressive against us and willing Europe to fail. It's in our absolutely vital interest to have these countries closer to us, and as soon as possible. And our example of 10 countries and then 12 countries shows that it's easy. It was not so problematic and difficult as it was thought in the very beginning, and it is perfect results for Europe.
One quick question to you, Mrs. Grybauskaité, before I go to Werner Hoyer. You made the strong case, and you as well, Eka, for the merits of Ukraine right now. So they are very experienced, they have a strong army, they are very good in digitalization, they are,
Fighting for it.
But is this also true for the countries of the Western Balkans?
Not.
Okay. What does it mean for them?
And for them, merits will matter because they are not in such situation where they are under pressure to go for European reforms and values. Some of them going backwards. I don't want to mention. And
do you see Ukraine overtaking Albania and Serbia in terms of
maybe
accession?
Serbia, but other countries maybe not. But what I want to say that yes, merits matters and very important. And we have an example already in our enlargement. Bulgaria and Romania came to European Union a few years later, mainly because of some reforms and anti-corruption measures and whatever. So, but that was some exceptions finally on merits. But decision final was political one. And the same with the 8 countries, maybe not all together in bunch. They're very different, but Ukraine is even
and sometimes difficult to see.
Yeah, but if the countries themselves are not pushing radical changes, you cannot take them by, by force inside.
Yeah.
But for Ukraine, the speed of their life during the war, 1 minute as we have, in 1 minute they do more than we are doing in a decade. So they are in suppressed time frame because of the war. And we need to learn from them because they will be an example for all of us how to manage and how to make decisions in difficult times without discussing on formalities of treaties and so on. We indulging in a relaxed format of discussions. We are dragging ourselves in discussions and in our bubble of Brussels. But we can go more fast and more decisive.
I completely get your point. Mr. Hoyer, do you think it's that easy? Is it only formalities, the treaties, and we should not indulge ourselves in those kinds of debate? Can you think of a Europe that works with more member states on the same basis of the treaty?
I see quite clearly that this is going to be difficult. On the other hand, if I go back to the many years that I've been sitting on the Foreign Affairs and the General Affairs Council, I would say very, very often I was of the opinion this cannot work. We will never get agreement of all. And at the end of the day, we made it. But it sometimes takes too much time, and there's too much opportunity for hostage-taking and things like that. We presently see that the external dimension of the European Union presently, and nobody takes notes of it here, this is totally blocked because the ACP agreement, which is the treaty work that connects us to the developing world, is blocked because the veto of one country. And if we cannot overcome this, then Europe's role in the world will be weakened because the people in the South already say, you know Ukraine only anymore and don't do anything for development, which, by the way, in substance is nonsense, but this prejudice is being produced, so we must enable ourselves to act. But I think Ukraine will be an accelerator of the whole thing because they will make it. And whether Serbia takes more time, we'll see. But we should not make Ukraine dependent on the progress that is made in some of these more difficult Western Balkan countries.
Thank you. Ivan, you already started on that topic. You said that Europe has to reinvent itself. I still don't have a clear idea what you mean by that. So what are the priorities that have to be changed? What are the prices we have to pay more in the future for gaining what? Can you outline a bit what is the new idea of Europe you're thinking about?
Listen, but the new idea of Europe is not a book to be written. It's a constellation of crisis, responses to crisis, political interests. I do believe that people really try to see something that is very kind of a clear and neat. I don't believe it's going to be like this. Just give you an example of what we have been talking. If you want to stop Ukraine today, you're never going to say that you're against Ukraine, but you don't want basically to keep the Western Balkans out. So from this point of view, the idea that you're going to get the Western Balkans in is also going to be based on the fact that different countries in the European Union have different security concerns. And keep in mind, as a result of the Ukrainian wars, the old imperial maps came on the surface. Normally people are talking about the East versus West in this war. It's not exactly the case. If you go on the public opinion polls, this is the war that very much also divided the East. Some of the most kind of reluctant supporters of Ukraine on the level of public opinion are countries like Bulgaria. Of course, I'm even not talking Serbia and so on. Why? They're coming from a different empire. For them, basically, it was always the obsession with Turkey, not with Russia. Why I'm saying this? As a result of it, Europe is going very much to decide its future, all the time balancing all these interests, all the securities, but also opportunities. Listen, Ukraine is a very big state. This is the problem in Europe. When we sit here on this table, we all basically have the same armchairs. But some countries are bigger than others. Also, as a territory, as a population. The biggest problem why you cannot keep these countries outside for a long time is the fear of depopulation. If you allow people to move and you are not getting countries in, at the end of the day, people are going to join European Union individually. Because it is much easier to change your country than to change your government. And as a result of it, we are going to have a depopulation that you see in Western Balkans, which very much, by the way, explains some of the political problems that we see. A colleague of mine has this great definition. He said in the Balkans, we transitioned from repressive to depressive regimes. And part of it is that a lot of younger, better educated people find it very easy to move. So from this point of view, you cannot allow this process to go. By the way, this is a crisis which Ukraine can face. If you're keeping them out, with 5 million Ukrainians outside of the country, we're going to depopulate the country and make effective reconstruction not possible. So in my view, this is the real choices that you face. And on the basis of how you're reacting to all of them, you're going to end up with the reinvented EU. It's not going to be some political scientist that is going to have a vision.
Please go ahead, and then I open it up to
Sure.
questions.
Just to follow up a little bit maybe on that, I think that part of reinvention, at least when I mentioned that from my side, is that for Europe not to be seen by others and by Europe itself as fatigued. This was one of the worst perceptions and projections of Europe that Europe itself put on itself, Europe being fatigued with enlargement, with this and that, as an old nation being really depressed and tired of things that actually made Europe bigger, stronger, and more prosperous. So there was this dichotomy in this perception quite a bit. Now the cards are open. Even you mentioned that as well, that all these perceptions about interdependency, that the force doesn't matter, all of that. It's a highly competitive, but not just economically competitive world. It is shift that we still don't know how it will end up. So either you shape it to your benefit, or you just always complain about it so that you have to react to something that others driving at you. And here you are on a continent when it's not even far away from Europe, but Russia is a destructive force. It's right in the middle of it. So let's face it, the biggest reinvention for Europe is that we owe it to ourselves honesty, sober and real pragmatic approach to it, understanding that what is it that upcoming at least few decades hold for us, how much we need to be ready for our own sake to fight for a better future in the way that we are somewhat at least in a driving seat, if not in one of the leading seats globally, and by maintaining that, or we will be pushed somewhat in the periphery of the decision-making processes. And for that to happen, as it is in the private business, in private lives, at a micro level, is the same. You need to re-energize the process. And enlargement as a way of getting there, of reinventing idea of who we are in Europe, that yes, we have the right to have self-confidence, that we have a resolve and responsibility towards the future generations to shape that future, but that comes at a cost. And I think that's part of reinvention as well, that it's not a sense of entitlement, holding on to the way of life as we knew it. No, life is always changing, and we need to understand what the future life will be and to shape it. And then there's a very few sort of analogy as an example, perhaps with the climate change. very engaging discussion that we've been part of as a first panel, we still talk about climate change on a global level as if how we can reverse it. It's happening. How we mitigate climate change as a scale of that, and how we ensure that we can adapt to the new climate that one way or the other will still be there globally, is the way of a survival instinct we need to have as a human race. So not to have an idea that how we lived decades ago should be how we will live decades to come, because it's not going to be there. So honesty and real pragmatism resolved with the commitment to fight for it and be in the driving seat. We do have the right to be self-confident and to be in that position rather than looking from the periphery how others will shape the life for this continent.
Thank you. And now it's up to you. If you have questions, make yourself seen. Introduce yourself, please. Please also tell us to whom you're directing your, addressing your question, and please make it the question. Thank you. First one is over there.
Okay, hello. I'm Ahmed Kuitov and I'm from the European Union. Actually, I want to first to thank and I really appreciate the efforts of the people which are born in the 30s and the 40s, because thanks to them, thanks to their time in the past, they create one very good European Union. They establish and they create this European Union. And I really thank you for that effort which you spent. But nowadays, unfortunately, my generations, not all of them, but a kind of a big percent of the people, we don't know how to deal with the crisis. In the last few years, we have not so big crises, depend to the Second World War, First World War, and so on. And I have a question. Could you recommend us how to foster intergenerational cooperation, because the wise people which are here, which are born in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they have a lot of knowledge which we, the young people, need it. But how we can create this instrument to have the results, the wise of the old, with the desire and the power of the young people, because all European Union needs to continue to exist. Thank you very much.
Okay. I can go with my own example and experience. It's the best probably to apply for. Then Lithuania became again independent and regained independent. I was in my 30s. And for my generation at that time was responsibility to rebuild country. I was negotiating the first treaty with the European Union in '92. I was negotiating and heading negotiation of association treaty with the European Union. And I became the first commissioner of Lithuania. Then Lithuania joined. So my generation was learning from everybody. There was really nothing to learn from older generation because it was mainly Soviet type of generation. But we were learning from everybody. We were learning from any example, from everything we were able to read. But the main teacher was life itself. The teacher is not to be afraid to take responsibility. And I always knew there is nobody behind me who will do it instead of me. And I went forward. And such our generation. So you in the 30s and 40s now, it's also the same. There is nobody behind you. It is you who are investing into future. But for that, you need to have courage to take responsibility. Most European leadership, we do not see the leadership with responsibility. It's more survival, it's more populism, and cycle for years from cycle for elections. We need young generation not to be afraid, to be real leaders who are taking responsibility, risking their own career and even private lives, but having the idea of creating better life, better Europe, better life for your future generations. So it's very personal, but doable, and each generation has its own challenges, and only you can deal with these challenges. Nobody else can help you.
Well, Dalia, after this impressive statement, it is difficult to follow up. But I would like to say that the generation of my parents had to come out of a disaster that had been produced particularly by Germans in the first half of the last century. And then, when I was already in politics, all of a sudden we were confronted with the opportunity to grab European integration and European reunification. And I think you can do that only with a historical mind, with courage, resolve, and self-confidence. And what I'm missing in the political debate today, and it's not necessarily only a generational question, is a little bit more of courage and self-esteem. It's sometimes a certain lust to engage in doomsday scenarios instead of adopting a can-do approach.
Whom are you thinking about?
Well, I could name quite a few, but take a very important example. You mentioned climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. Where, if not there, in the green technologies are the Europeans ahead of the rest of the world? We are. We must use this potential in the global scale and play it out. So a little bit more can do, I think, is urgently necessary in this European Union, which otherwise will die in nitty-gritty.
I think part of, if to be short on that, not to take too much time, is that the life accelerated in so many ways. Within one generation, we went through so many technological advancements and leap forward experiences that previous generations would do just one or two maybe in a generation. And I guess part of what it takes for Europe, part of Europe at least, which is not coming from that experience of building from the scratch really for so much, is that to understand that there is no purgatory, so to say, for a younger generation in which you need to be buttressed by the experience so that you can gain a position in public service or in private business only after certain years, so to say, because only then you could be considered as mature and experienced. We need a hybrid approach, diversification of that, opening the doors unconventionally and making it more competitive intergenerationally, because with the new way of life, the younger generation might be more apt in thinking that in that outside of the box and technologically advanced way rather than previous generation would ever think before. And I can give you an example from a political angle as well of my own country, where we've been engaged in during the dissolution of the Soviet Union in so many ways, in protests at an age that my daughters are now 15 and 12. So I just think of it sometimes that it was so surreal that, I was doing what I was doing at the time in the public demonstrations, understanding that my children are of that age now. So we had to build it all from the scratch really in so many ways, thinking that they would not be placed anymore in the position future generation of looked at from that time, that they would have had a normal life, so they wouldn't have to fight for freedom of expression, for the basic rights of democracy, a European future. And here we were this year in my own country when younger Gen Z generation came to the streets and gave the chance to Georgia to retain democracy when our government put forward the legislation that would link us to Russia rather than to Georgia. So I find this hope and respect in a younger generation that I never knew had so much conviction and commitment for fighting for the basic rights and rules and democratic future. It's there. We just need to trust that they are capable to act on it and engage them more in this case. Give them more responsibility if they, on a merit basis, deserve and act for it, rather than thinking that they are too young for any of those responsibilities already now.
Yeah. I have 2 points to make. One is that probably your generation can turn to be better than you expect, because you don't know in the moment of crisis what we'll do. Now we speak as if basically the leadership is something that you can learn. But just before the war in Ukraine was starting, I was reading public opinion polls. And the support for President Zelensky was around 25%. The mistrust of the public was very high. Probably President Putin was reading the same polling. And basically, if you read this, you believe that this is a country that is not going to make it. And then you have the momentum. And it could be just 3 minutes, just a phrase, give me ammunition and not a ram. And not a person, but the nation is changing. So from this point of view, generation is based on a shaping collective experience. You still don't know it.
Yes.
You can do it fine, You can also not do it fine. But there is one thing in which the younger generation is in a different position. You don't have the numbers. In most of European countries, because of the demographic structure of our society, young people are small numbers. As a result of it, young people start to have a problem within the democratic system because nevertheless how you vote, your votes are never enough. From this point of view, the biggest challenge to your generation is to make a coalition, intergenerational coalitions. Otherwise, you're going to be much more fun on the street than in the government.
We have the next question right over there.
Hi, my name is Luke Bishop, and I am the one of the representatives from Ireland for the Charlemagne U Prize. So this is for any of the panelists, and it's on the accession of the Western Balkans. Do you expect a kind of an all-in-one package with all of them kind of accessing at the same time? As Ms. Grybauskaité said, there's obviously disparities between the way they're transposing, so do you expect that there will be an all-in-one package, or do you expect the region to be split up further? Thank you.
It will depend. As it depended, then decision was made about 10. It will depend a lot. The first on the path of reforms, on the merits, and of course on the political window of opportunity. Political window of opportunity means not only economic development, reforms, rule of law, anti-corruption things, but also about security of European Union. And if we will think that these countries for us are necessary, not only because of merits, but also because of the ring of security around European Union, it could be the bulk of countries altogether. If we will think that one country or two maybe, as it looks now today, maybe are not in the framework of our values, or even could destroy or make problems inside Europe if they will be included now. Everything will depend on political window and on political willingness and decision of already member states in the European Union. So why it is no way to predict the bulk of countries will join, or separately the groups of countries will join, and I don't think that it is necessary to do at the time. We will decide in proper time, but the main thing that we need to be ready to decide and to invite them.
But if I may follow up on that, we saw so much struggle between Slovenia and Croatia only on maritime issues already. I think the divisions between the remaining candidates are much deeper than they were between Croatia and Slovenia. What gives you the trust that this will not be a huge problem once one of the countries is member with a veto right to the accession of the others?
It's about nitty-gritty. We can think in such kind of small things, all of us.
But they're going to be real problems then?
It is not real problems.
Okay.
If you look from far, the real problem is a war. And today we see what means the war and aggression, which is going and willing to destroy the nation. Here is a problem. These kind of debates, finally, they will be solved. And especially, for example, our own negotiations where we had a nuclear power plant, Chernobyl type. And only one country, Austria, was vetoing our membership and asked us to promise to close it. It was great and terrible pain in country because we depended very much on nuclear power plant at the time. But that was a condition. I openly say it was one country. It was condition. And we closed it. We promised and we closed it. So during the process of negotiations, there are a lot of instruments we have how to ask some countries to stop nitty-gritty things, and that the membership is more important than these kind of debates.
I hope you're right. We have the next question.
But as an instrument, we will use it.
Next one. Okay. It's very difficult with the lights. Okay.
Yes, hello. Anastasia from Estonia, a former winner of the Charlemagne Youth Prize. I'll list 5 cases and then my question will come. So first, in August last year, I was at the European Allback Forum talking to Valina Chekarova. And she was saying that the whole fairy tale bubble of NATO enlarging and it being a danger was actually believed in the European decision-making circles. Marina Kaljurand from Estonia, MEP, talking to her this year, also hearing that it was a difficult uphill battle in decision-making circles, saying that this is urgent and we do need to act. A few days ago, I was with my relatives in Belgium and talking about a Belgian neurosurgeon, or somebody very well educated and with a very high status in society, but who likes Russian. He was singing the same mantra, that it was dangerous, NATO was coming too close to Russia, Putin is in the right to act. And coming from Estonia, in Narva, which is 90% plus Russian speaking, we just had the 9th of May, Europe Day, with some incidents from the Russian border. But a girl who was wearing a t-shirt saying Putin H3 stars O was basically let go from her work as a teacher, a music teacher at a school in Estonia. Before we start enlarging, and here's my question, before we really talk this much about enlarging, which is a very useful conversation, no doubt, what are we doing with this? Because living in a Baltic state and also speaking Russian, I keep coming across outrageous cases within the EU borders. How do we address this? Thank you.
Ivan, perhaps a question for you?
Yeah. Listen, you're never going to expect all the people in different parts in Europe to feel the situation in the same way. We don't feel the same way about anything. Not only about Russia, about COVID, about this, about that. The problem is different. The problem is that Europeans realized that certain type of expectations that Europe had with respect to the Russia after the end of the Cold War and not the anymore, that the nature of the border is going to be changed. And when we're talking about Ukraine, and this is going to be one of the major challenges, we like to talk about post-war. When the post-war starts. Do we really believe that we are going to have a peace treaty of a time that basically people have in the 19th century? I'm very, to be honest, skeptical about this. I much more easily can imagine a Korean type of a situation with an arms border that is border, with the security guarantees for Ukraine, with a big Ukrainian army, which probably is going to stay for a long time, which means that they're going to have a military budget very different than the military budget of many other EU member states. When I said that EU is going to change, this is also going to change. And then the problem is, and this is a bigger issue which is going to happen, is that all of the countries, they really have different historical experiences. During this 1 year, one thing that I realized is the following. We can have a common European dreams, but the nightmares are strictly national. People go to their history and they remember things. And it's not by accident that the country that have been part of the Russian Empire totally identified with Ukraine as this being their war, and countries which have been far away, basically while they're very much critical to what Russia is doing, does not experiencing this way. From this point of view, for me, the whole major story about Europe is that you're renegotiating all the time. You're renegotiating your security priorities, you're renegotiating your strategic culture, and this is going to be always like this. There are always going to be a Belgian doctors which like this or that. This is not, you're not expecting all Europeans to become Estonians, because don't expect this, because the other option is that all Europeans can become Bulgarians, so we should have a diversity.
Thank you very much. The next question goes to somebody who for many of you don't need any introduction. Elmar Brok, please.
Prepare for a speech.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I agree with everything that has been said. I agree that the West Balkan countries, for geopolitical fairness reasons, for reasons of common interest, Moldova, Georgia, I think they should all join the EU. I think tomorrow we will perhaps have an election in Turkey, which will start the discussion about them again. If we look at all these candidates, the EU would have 37 members. And I think what I've heard from Mrs. President, I think it's necessary for us to prepare this for the EU. The speech by the German Chancellor in the European Parliament pleaded for greater decision-making power and independence. So this is not nitty-gritty. Today, in many areas, we're not in a position to master challenges quick enough, new challenges. And if we don't have the willingness to develop European capacity to action, then with 37 members, we will be weaker. We don't want that. And I think, therefore, we should, the membership accession candidates should not fulfill the Copenhagen treaties, but the European Union should fulfill these. And I would like, therefore, we need more efficient decision-making processes.
Werner might jump in first.
May I begin? Thank you for this rendezvous avec la réalité. We are talking about a European Union of far more than 30 countries. And for becoming a member of the European Union, this is such an attractive situation that some people might swallow quite a bit. But if at the end of the day we preserve the opportunity to keep somebody hostage, by saying with one vote I can keep every decision from being taken, then we have lost it. So we must use this opportunity now, the European Union membership being so attractive, in order to reform the rules and also ourselves. I think this is unavoidable, because otherwise we are going to continue the way we are doing it right now. This is more a question of the reform capabilities of the present member states of the European Union than of the future ones.
I want to add a little bit. There is a debate, of course, what goes first, chicken or whatever, and the same with it is reform of decision-making or enlargement. I don't think it is contradictory, and we need to separate these things from each other. We need to change and streamline our decision-making, yes, but what kind of form are we asking to change the treaties? That means enlargement will never happen, never, because it will take ratification of most European countries. Can we use instruments we already have? We can, and we are not using them in full. Do we capable to agree on QMV, for example, for foreign policy, some questions? Yes, we do. Already in Lisbon Treaty we have for sanctions. We never used. Why? It is already an instrument on our table. So again, I'm saying that if we will be having conditioned the first to reform and only then to enlarge, it will never happen. Enlargement will never happen. And during the member states 10 and 12 before in 2004 enlargement, we were doing this all together. It was political decision based on merit, but political decision for enlargement. And the reform of decision-making was all the time rolling on. As long as we in European Union, the Union was reforming its decision-making in the framework of changing some treaties. The last change was Lisbon Treaty. Before Irish referendum was intervening, we had another treaty before. So we're capable to do it all together, not separating, not making it contradictory to each other, and not stopping enlargement process. Otherwise, Europe will drag into the debates, will stop development, because there will be a lot of countries which will be not eager to reform and go for large change of treaties. We don't need to do it theoretically. We can do it all together. Change our decision-making, to streamline decision-making, and also to go for faster enlargement. I know that in Parliament, European Parliament, always there was a desire to have more powers. And in each negotiations, including on budget, European budget, or for 7 years financial framework, each cycle of such negotiations, Parliament was receiving more and more powers. It's a fact. It's coming slowly, not in the large bulk, but it's coming. Yes, we do need more balanced power between three main institutions, the Council, Member States, the Commission and Parliament. But it's happening with each cycle of budget, each cycle of negotiations, including enlargement. It will be conditioned from European Parliament to receive more powers. It will be conditional for Member States to give in.
But isn't an evolution in 7-year cycle too slow for the challenge?
Now, during the war, yes, it is too slow, and it will be faster. Yes, it will be faster, but you cannot enforce it. To think that we can change treaties and make us easy, forcing other countries to vote for one or another question, it will never happen.
Mr. Hoyer, you spoke about a rendezvous with reality, and earlier you said you miss leadership and you see too much populism. Who could give the EU the momentum to move from the 27, from within this 27?
I think it is necessary that the biggest countries of the European Union are not too timid and too cautious.
Can you describe how is Germany?
The biggest country in this European Union is the Federal Republic of Germany, and there is a saying in Brussels and far beyond that when the helicopters used to distribute the European DNA across the capitals of the European Union, in Berlin they put up the umbrellas. You know, we need to see that if we get rid of the unanimity rule, then, of course, Albania one day will not be able to block a decision, but Germany neither. And this is why the whole thing is so very unattractive in Berlin.
But what does it mean? What does it mean?
We need, in my view, I go further than President Grybauskaité, because I think some changes in the treaty would be desirable, but I know how difficult it is. But it would at least be heartwarming if we at least would use the options that we have. We could do much more with the present rules than we are actually doing.
I just want to make one point, because I agree that you're right, but the story is, this is the negotiations. One of the countries for which veto is critically important is the current Polish government. On the other side, for them, Ukraine joining European Union is a security imperative, honestly speaking. So this is what you're negotiating. All sides have their priorities. And from this point of view, you're saying, if you want this, basically be ready to do something. And I'm saying this because this is changing dramatically. The timing is changing and the pressing is changing. And also in these last 3 months, people are seeing only how much more common certain policies are becoming, particularly on the level of defense, European Union together buying ammunition and so on. But there is also another trend. In economic policies, member states are getting more freedom to move than before, and to be honest, Germany is the greatest example as their industrial policies and others. So there are different trends all the time. And from this point of view, this renegotiations is what I'm calling the reinvention of the European Union. This is not a project to be implemented. This is basically a tough negotiation to be closed.
Just a little bit to add to that, I think the convergence in factors, time and all of it that has been mentioned with divergent interests, but then interest from the different member states that ultimately could be put together. It's a unique time and opportunity, and it could be and should be used for that. Second, I could not agree more with the factor that it's not mutually exclusive. So it should not be done in the way that let's do this first and then we'll continue with the enlargement. This will be disastrous because this will just create another purgatory, so to say, in a large form for membership compared to the Western Balkans. Should be merit-based, obviously, and engine-driven from the countries that could do more. But for Europe, I think there needs to be this realization. I don't want to be too critical, but there is already precedent with failed membership negotiations of Western Balkans and with Turkey as well. We frequently forget that. There was a different momentum with Turkey that was lost for different reasons we don't have time to go to, but it's on EU as well now to prove that it's not that others are knocking on the door and you have to distance and then see, well, do I open the door or not, at which condition? This remains to be the case, partially, obviously, with benchmarks, criteria, and all of that, but there needs to be a step forward made from the EU to put back credibility into seriousness of the offer from the EU side, which is broken. So in other words, that symbiotic link needs to be re-emerging somehow in this situation. So it's not only on Ukrainians to do the homework with reforms, which by the way they do vigorously, but for them to trust that it's real. And for that, accession talks need to start soon. And that's the first step. They're not becoming members this year, but it's accession talks that needs to start if, again, the evaluation of the homework that is now happening that Ukrainians did will be positive, obviously, in this direction, which I'm hopeful and expecting that it should be based on the track record.
Thank you very much. And to quote again Volodymyr Zelensky, if I mean this year, then I mean this year, 2023. So let's see what happens. Thank you very much for your participation in this debate. And the question of enlargement could indeed get much more interesting still on Sunday, depending on the outcome of the Turkish election, because we speak about the Western Balkans, we speak about Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, but the biggest candidate country is Turkey. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Danke.
Okay,
Danke.
Vielen Dank.
Danke. Danke.
Okay, thank you.